Nothing. She told him she understood. That he owed her nothing. That she was releasing him from whatever promise a dead man had made him keep. Still, he said nothing. He just looked at her. The way a man looks at something he wasn't supposed to want. Then he took one step forward. And what he said next, those quiet, careful words in a penthouse above the city, changed both of their lives forever. This is the story of a woman the world forgot, and the dangerous man who refused to. The rain hit the windows of the penthouse like 1,000 tiny fists, and Angela Kerr stood in the middle of a room that did not belong to her, wearing a dress she could not afford, about to say something that would either save her dignity or shatter the last piece of hope she had been foolish enough to carry. She turned to face him. Jack McCloud stood near the bar cart with his back to the city skyline, his suit jacket unbuttoned. His jaw set in that hard line she had already learned meant he was listening even when he looked like he wasn't. The kind of man whose silence weighed more than most people's speeches. The kind of man who could buy the building she lived in and forget about it by Tuesday. She pressed her palms flat against the sides of her thighs to keep her hands from shaking. "You don't have to marry me." The words came out steadier than she expected. She had practiced them in the mirror that morning, in the cab on the way here, in the elevator on the way up. She had practiced them the way a woman practices the thing she's terrified to say, because she knows the answer might destroy her. Jack didn't move. He studied her the way he studied everything, with a patience that made powerful men nervous and made Angela feel like she was standing under a light she could not escape. "I know what Nolan asked you," she continued. "I know what you promised him before he died, but I'm releasing you from that. You don't owe me anything." She waited for the relief to cross his face, the quiet nod, the polite agreement. Every man she had ever known had eventually found a reason to walk away from her, and Jack McCloud had more reasons than any of them. He was 36 years old, built like something carved out of granite and consequence, and he ran an empire that stretched from the docks of Boston to the private rooms of Atlantic City. He did not need a 32-year-old woman with wide hips and second-hand shoes and a family that treated her like furniture. But Jack did not nod. He did not look relieved. He set his glass down on the marble counter, and the quiet click of crystal against stone was the only sound in the room. "Are you finished?" he asked. Angela blinked. "What? Are you finished deciding what I want?" The question landed like something heavy dropped from a height, and Angela felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. Jack McCloud walked toward her, not fast, not slow, the way a man walks when he has already made up his mind and nothing in the world is going to change it. He stopped 2 feet away from her, close enough that she could smell cedar and smoke and something cold and expensive, and he looked down at her with those pale gray eyes that had made grown men stammer in boardrooms and courtrooms and the back seats of cars they never got out of. "I made a promise to your cousin," he said quietly. He paused. "But I don't break promises because they're easy, Angela. I break them when they stop being true." She stared at him. "This one," he said, "hasn't stopped being true." And that was the moment Angela Kerr understood she was in far more danger than she had ever imagined. Not from the world Jack McCloud controlled, but from the way he was looking at her, as if she were the only real thing in it. The funeral had been 3 weeks earlier. Nolan Kerr died on a Tuesday in October, in a private room at Massachusetts General, with the kind of quiet that only comes when a man has been fighting something for so long that surrender finally feels like kindness. He was 34, pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came 8 months before the funeral, and by the time the doctors told him there was nothing left to try, Nolan had already known for weeks. He could feel it the way sailors feel a storm, not in the sky, but in the bones. Jack McCloud was the last person to see him alive. They had known each other since they were 17. 2 boys from Southie who had nothing in common except the understanding that the world did not give things to people like them. It took them. Jack had risen through violence and discipline and a mind sharp enough to see 3 moves ahead. Nolan had risen through loyalty, the rare, absolute kind that could not be bought or broken. When Jack was 23 and still climbing, still proving himself in the brutal hierarchy of the McCloud organization, a deal had gone wrong in a warehouse off the waterfront. 2 men from a rival crew had cornered him. One had a gun. The other had a length of chain. Jack would have died that night if Nolan Kerr hadn't come through a side door with a crowbar and a willingness to bleed. Nolan took a bullet in the shoulder. Jack took a scar across his ribs, and from that night forward, there was nothing Jack McLeod would not do for Nolan Kerr. Nothing. So when Nolan lay in that hospital bed, with tubes running out of him like roots, trying to hold him to the earth, and he looked at Jack with glassy, morphine-heavy eyes, and he said the one thing Jack did not expect him to say. Jack listened. "I need you to look after Angela." Jack frowned. "Who?" "My cousin, my mother's sister's daughter." Nolan coughed, the wet, rattling kind that came from somewhere deep and wrong. "She's alone, Jack. She's been alone her whole life. Her family. They don't see her. They never did." Jack leaned forward in the chair beside the bed. He had been sitting there for 4 hours. His phone had buzzed 37 times. He had not looked at it once. "What do you need me to do?" Nolan's hand found Jack's wrist. His grip was weak. It had once been iron. "She's got no one. When I'm gone, she's got nobody. My aunt treats her like a stain on the family. Her cousins are worse." He swallowed hard. "She's good, Jack. She's the only good person in that whole family. The only one who visited me here. The only one who sat in this room and didn't look at me like I was already a corpse." Jack said nothing. He waited. "Marry her." The word landed like a brick through a window. "Nolan, marry her, not because you love her. I'm not asking you to love her. I'm asking you to protect her." Nolan's eyes were wet now, and Jack understood that the tears had nothing to do with the dying. "She deserves someone who won't let the world keep stepping on her. You're the only person I trust to do that." Jack sat very still. He thought about the empire he ran, the enemies he had, the life he lived in, the spaces between luxury and violence. He thought about bringing a civilian woman into that life, a woman he had never met, a woman whose biggest connection to his world was a cousin who was about to leave it. And then he looked at Nolan Kerr, the man who had taken a bullet for him in a warehouse off the waterfront, and he said the only thing he could say. "I'll take care of her." Nolan closed his eyes. "Promise me." "I promise." Nolan Kerr died 14 hours later. Jack McLeod was not in the room when it happened. He was standing in the hallway, staring at his phone, reading the name Angela Kerr for the first time in a text message Nolan had sent him 3 days ago. A name, an address, a single line. "She won't ask for help. You'll have to offer it." The funeral was held at a church in Dorchester that smelled like old wood and candle wax and the particular brand of grief that clings to places where too many people have said goodbye. Jack stood in the back row because he did not belong in the front, and because he had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous place to stand is where everyone can see you. He scanned the room the way he always did. Exits, faces, hands, professional habit. The church was half full. Nolan's mother sat in the front pew, small and bent, and clutching a tissue like a lifeline. Beside her sat a woman Jack assumed was Nolan's aunt, sharp-featured, dry-eyed, radiating the kind of rigid composure that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with performance. And then he saw her. Angela Kerr sat at the end of the third pew, alone, not beside the family, not included in the cluster of relatives who had arranged themselves in the front rows like a photograph meant to prove they cared. She sat apart, her hands folded in her lap, her dark hair pulled back in a simple twist, her face turned slightly toward the altar, with an expression that hit Jack somewhere beneath his ribs. She was not performing grief, she was living it. She was a full-figured woman with brown skin and soft features, and the kind of quiet presence that most people would walk past without noticing. She wore a black dress that was clean and pressed but not expensive. Her shoes were practical. Her only jewelry was a thin silver chain around her neck. She did not look like anyone Jack had ever known in his world. Not the sharp, polished women who circled his orbit, not the wives of his associates who wore their husbands' money like armor. Angela Kerr looked like someone who had spent a very long time learning how to take up as little space as possible Jack watched her for the rest of the service. He watched the way she pressed her lips together when Nolan's name was spoken. Oh, the way her fingers tightened around each other when the priest talked about God's plan. The way she never once looked at the family members who had placed her at the end of the pew, like an afterthought. And he watched the moment, the single, precise moment, when Nolan's aunt leaned over and whispered something to the woman beside her, and both of them glanced back at Angela, and Angela saw it, and something in her face shut down like a light behind a curtain. After the service, Jack waited. People filed out slowly, the way they always do, shaking hands, murmuring condolences, performing the theater of mourning that human beings have perfected over centuries. Jack leaned against the brick wall outside the church and watched Angela emerge last. She stood on the steps alone, blinking in the gray October light, holding a small purse against her stomach like a shield. No one stopped to talk to her. No one pulled her into a hug, or no one said, "I'm sorry about Nolan. He loved you. He talked about you all the time." She stood there for almost a full minute, alone among people who shared her blood, and then she turned and began walking toward the bus stop at the corner. Jack pushed off the wall. He caught up to her halfway down the block, and when she heard his footsteps behind her, she turned quickly, startled, her brown eyes wide and cautious. "Angela Kerr?" She looked at him the way a woman looks at a man she cannot place, with polite distance and the quiet, automatic assessment of threat that every woman learns before she learns algebra. "Yes, my name is Jack McLeod. I was a friend of Nolan's." The change in her face was immediate. The caution softened. The distance closed by a fraction. She pressed her purse a little tighter against her stomach, but her eyes warmed. "You're Jack," she said, not a question. "Nolan talked about you." "He talked about you too." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the ghost of a smile that did not quite survive the day. "He shouldn't have," she said quietly. "There's not much to talk about." Jack studied her. He was not a man who made quick judgments about people. He had survived too long in a world where first impressions got men killed. But standing on a cracked sidewalk in Dorchester, looking at this woman who spoke about herself as if she were a footnote in someone else's story, Jack McLeod felt something shift. Not attraction, not yet, something closer to recognition. "Can I give you a ride somewhere?" he asked. She hesitated. He could see her weighing it. The danger of getting into a car with a strange man, the embarrassment of being seen at a bus stop, in a funeral dress, the bone-deep exhaustion of a day spent grieving alone in a room full of people who did not care. "You don't have to do that," she said. Jack almost smiled. "Almost. Nolan told me you'd say that." Angela looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded, just once, and followed him to the black sedan that was idling at the curb. He drove her home himself, not a driver, not one of his men. Jack, behind the wheel. His hands at 10 and 2, the city sliding past the tinted windows in shades of gray and gold. She lived in a small apartment in Quincy, second floor of a triple-decker that had seen better decades. The paint was peeling. The front gate leaned at an angle that suggested it had given up. But the windows on the second floor were clean, and there was a small plant on the sill that someone had taken the time to care for. Jack pulled up to the curb and put the car in park. Angela sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the ride, and for being there today. Nolan would have been glad." "He would have been angry," Jack corrected, "at the way they treated you in there." Angela went still. She did not ask what he meant. She did not pretend she didn't know, and that told Jack everything he needed to know about how long it had been happening. "It's fine," she said, the two most dishonest words in the English language, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who had been saying them her entire life. Jack turned in his seat to look at her. "I need to talk to you about something. Not today. You've had enough today, but soon." Angela's brow furrowed. "About what?" "About a promise I made to Nolan." He watched the confusion cross her face, followed by something that looked almost like fear. The automatic flinch of a woman who had learned that promises made on her behalf usually came with conditions she could not meet. "Okay," she said. She it carefully. "I'll call you this week." She nodded. She opened the door. She paused. "Jack." "Yeah?" "Whatever Nolan asked you to do. You don't have to do it. He always worried too much about me." Jack looked at her. The streetlight behind her turned her hair amber at the edges. She was holding the car door like she was ready to run, and she was giving him permission to disappear, and she was doing it with such gentle, practiced resignation that it hit him like a fist. "Good night, Angela." She closed the door and walked up the steps to her building, and Jack sat in the car for a long time after the light in her window came on, staring at the peeling paint and the leaning gate and the small plant on the sill, and thinking about the way she had said, "You don't have to do it," as if she had been releasing people from obligations her entire life, because she had never believed she was worth the keeping. 3 days later, Jack called. Angela answered on the 4th ring, and from the slight breathlessness in her voice, he knew she had been debating whether to pick up since the first ring. "Can we meet?" he asked. No preamble, no small talk. Jack McLeod did not waste words the way other men did, like confetti thrown in the air to fill space. "When?" "Tonight. There's a restaurant in Back Bay. I'll send a car." "I can take the tea." "I'll send a car." There was a pause. He heard her swallow. "Okay." The restaurant was called Morrow. It occupied the ground floor of a brownstone that had been converted with the kind of money that makes old things look expensive instead of just old. Jack owned it, not publicly, through 3 layers of incorporation and a holding company registered in Delaware. But the staff knew, the chef knew, the hostess who greeted Angela at the door and led her to a private table in the back knew. Angela arrived in a navy blue blouse and dark slacks, her hair down around her shoulders, her face bare except for a touch of lipstick that she had probably debated for 20 minutes. She looked around the restaurant with the careful, slightly overwhelmed expression of a woman who was cataloging every detail so she could remember it later, because places like this were not her life, and she knew it. Jack stood when she approached the table. He had been raised by a grandmother who had come from the old country, who believed that a man stands when a woman enters a room, regardless of whether the woman is a queen or a cleaning woman. And Jack had kept this one soft thing in a life otherwise defined by hardness. Angela sat down across from him and folded her hands on the white tablecloth, and for a moment she just looked at him, really looked, as if she were trying to understand him, the way she might try to understand a language she had only ever heard spoken from a distance. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for the car. And the—" She gestured vaguely at the restaurant, the crystal glasses, the candlelight, the soft, expensive hush of a place designed to make people feel important. All of this, Jack nodded. He did not rush. The waiter came. Jack ordered for both of them, not because he assumed she couldn't choose, but because he had watched her scan the menu with the tiny, almost invisible frown of a woman calculating prices, and he wanted to remove that weight from her evening. When the waiter left, Jack leaned back in his chair and studied her. "You know what I do," he said, not a question. Angela's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "Nolan told me some things, not everything, but enough to understand." "Then you understand that I live in a world most people don't want to be near." "Yes." "And you understand that when I make a commitment, I don't make it lightly." She nodded. Her eyes had gone careful again, that watchful, self-protective stillness that he was beginning to recognize as her armor. Jack leaned forward. "Nolan asked me to marry you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Angela had ever heard. She stared at him. Her lips parted, her hands unfolded, and then folded again, tighter, as if she were physically trying to hold herself together. "I'm sorry," she said. "He asked you to what?" "He asked me to marry you, to protect you, to make sure you had someone in your corner after he was gone." Angela's face went through several things at once: shock, confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like grief, as if Nolan's love for her had reached her from beyond the grave, and she did not know whether to be grateful or devastated. That's... She shook her head. Jack, that's insane. He had no right to ask you that. He had every right. He saved my life. That doesn't mean you have to... She stopped herself, took a breath, started again. Look at me. He was looking at her. He had not stopped looking at her since she sat down. I mean, really look at me, she said, and her voice cracked slightly at the edges, and Jack heard in that crack all the years of being told she was too much and not enough, all at the same time. I'm a 32-year-old woman who works at a hotel front desk and lives in a walk-up in Quincy. I'm not the kind of woman that men like you. She trailed off and pressed her fingers against her forehead. Nolan shouldn't have put this on you. Jack waited until she was finished. Then he said very quietly, Are you done? She looked up at him. Her eyes were shining. Here's what I'm proposing, he said. A legal marriage. 1 year. At the end of the year, if you want to walk away, you walk away. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. You'll never have to worry about money again. But for 1 year, you carry my name. You live under my protection, and no one, not your aunt, not her daughters, not anyone, treats you like you don't matter. Angela stared at him. Why? She whispered. Because Nolan asked me to, and because I keep my promises. She shook her head slowly. You could write me a check. You could set up a trust. You don't have to marry me to keep a promise. Jack's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough that Angela noticed. Nolan didn't ask me to write you a check, he said. He asked me to take care of you. There's a difference. The food arrived. Angela did not touch hers. She sat there, in the candlelight, in this restaurant that smelled like fresh bread and money and the particular loneliness of being offered something you're afraid to want. And she looked at Jack McLeod with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. Can I think about it? She asked. Take whatever time you need. She picked up her fork, put it down again. Jack. Yeah? You're serious. It was not a question, but he answered it anyway. I don't say things I don't mean, Angela. It's the one luxury I allow myself. She called him 4 days later, 4 days of pacing her small apartment at 2 in the morning. 4 days of standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her own face, searching for whatever it was that Nolan had seen and she could not find. 4 days of hearing her aunt's voice in her head. That sharp, dismissive voice that had followed her since childhood, like a shadow she could never outrun. You're not built for love, Angela. Some women are roses, and some women are weeds. Best to know which one you are. She had been 17 when her aunt said that. Standing in her aunt's kitchen after a boy at school had asked her to prom as a joke. The other cousins had laughed. Her aunt had not even bothered to look up from the stove. Now she was 32, and a man who could have any woman in Boston was offering her his name, and she could not stop hearing weeds. She picked up the phone. I'll do it, she said. Good, Jack said. And then, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something, I'll pick you up Saturday. Bring whatever you want to keep. I'll take care of the rest. The line went dead. Angela sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the phone in her hand and thought, what have I done? The wedding was small, a judge's office downtown, Jack in a dark suit, Angela in a cream-colored dress she had found at a consignment shop in Cambridge. Simple, elegant, the kind of dress that whispered instead of shouted. She had debated for hours about what to wear, and in the end, she had chosen the dress that made her feel like herself, rather than the dress that tried to make her look like someone else. Jack noticed. He didn't say anything, but when she walked into the judge's chambers and he turned to look at her, something passed across his face. Something quick and private, like a door opening and closing, and Angela felt it in the center of her chest. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. Jack's lawyer served as one witness, a woman named Vera. Jack's personal assistant, steel-haired and unreadable, served as the other. The judge read the words. Angela said I do with a voice that was steady, even though her hands were shaking. Jack said I do the way he said everything, with the quiet certainty of a man who had weighed every word before it left his mouth. When the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," there was a moment of absolute stillness. Jack turned to her. Angela looked up at him. The distance between them felt like a country, vast and unmapped and full of things neither of them understood yet. He leaned down. He pressed his lips to her forehead. Not her mouth. Her forehead, a gesture so tender and so unexpected that Angela's eyes closed involuntarily, and she felt something crack inside her that she had not even known was holding. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. And then Jack straightened up and offered her his arm, and they walked out of the judge's chambers as husband and wife, and Angela thought, he kissed my forehead like he was making a promise to something he hasn't named yet. Jack's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the Seaport district, a glass and steel tower that overlooked the harbor on one side and the city on the other. The elevator opened directly into the living space, which was vast and clean and minimal in the way that only very expensive things can be. Dark, hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like it had been chosen by someone who valued silence. Angela stood in the entryway with her 2 suitcases and felt the specific, physical sensation of being a footnote in someone else's paragraph. "Your room is this way," Jack said. He led her down a hallway lined with abstract art, nothing she recognized, nothing with explanations, to a door at the far end. He opened it. The room was beautiful. A queen bed with white linens, a window that looked out over the water, a closet that was empty and waiting, a bathroom with a soaking tub and marble tile, and towels so thick they looked like they had never been used. Angela set her suitcases on the floor and looked around, and she felt 2 things at once. Gratitude so large it was almost painful, and a loneliness so specific it had a shape. This is beautiful, Jack. Thank you." He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, his shoulders nearly filling the space. "There's food in the kitchen. Vera stocked everything. If you need anything else, just tell me." She nodded. He started to turn away. "Jack," he stopped. "I know this is strange," she said. "I know this whole situation is not normal. But I want you to know that I'll try to stay out of your way. I'll keep my space. I won't be a burden." Jack looked at her from the doorway, and for the first time since she had met him, his expression changed in a way she could read. It was not anger. It was not pity. It was something harder and quieter, something that lived in the territory between frustration and sorrow. "You're not a burden, Angela," he said. "Don't say that again." He turned and walked down the hallway, and Angela stood in the middle of her beautiful room and pressed her hand against her mouth and did not cry, because she had stopped crying about these things a long time ago, and she was not going to start again just because a dangerous man with gray eyes had told her she was not a burden, as if he meant it. The first week was strange. They moved around each other like planets in neighboring orbits, close enough to feel the pull, far enough to pretend it wasn't there. Jack left early in the mornings and came home late. Angela continued working her shifts at the front desk of the Harbor Regency, catching the tea from Seaport to Back Bay and back, moving through her days with the same quiet efficiency she had always used to survive. They ate together twice, both times at the kitchen island, both times in a silence that was not uncomfortable but was not yet comfortable either. Jack ate the way he did everything, deliberately, without waste. Angela ate carefully, the way she had always eaten in front of other people. Small bites, measured portions, the lifelong habit of a woman who had been made to feel that her appetite was something to apologize for. Jack noticed that too. He noticed everything. He noticed that she washed her dishes by hand even though the penthouse had a dishwasher. He noticed that she made the bed with hospital corners every morning, tight and precise, as if she were trying to prove she deserved the space. He noticed the way she moved through the apartment, quietly, along the edges, taking up as little room as possible. He noticed the books she read. Literary fiction mostly, thick novels with cracked spines that she carried in her purse like contraband. He noticed the way she spoke on the phone with guests at the hotel, patient and warm and genuinely kind. The voice of someone who had decided to be gentle in a world that had never been gentle with her. And he noticed the small things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she held her coffee mug with both hands, wrapped around it like it was giving her something she needed. The way she stood at the window late at night when she thought he was asleep, looking out at the harbor with an expression that was neither happy nor sad, but something in between. The face of a woman who had learned to live in the margin between wanting and having. Jack McCloud had built an empire on his ability to observe, to read people, to understand what they wanted before they said it, and to use that understanding to survive. But observing Angela Kerr was different. It was not strategic. It was not calculating. It was the slow, involuntary attention of a man who was beginning to see someone he had not expected to find. The second week, something shifted. It started small. A Tuesday night, Jack came home later than usual. Past midnight, his jaw tight, his knuckles raw beneath his gloves. He walked into the kitchen expecting darkness and silence, and found Angela sitting at the island with a cup of tea and a book, wearing an oversized sweater and reading glasses she had never worn in front of him before. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes went to his hands, quick, observant, the way a woman who has lived around difficult men learns to read a room by reading the body. She did not ask what happened. She stood up, went to the cupboard, took down a second mug, and poured hot water from the kettle she had apparently kept warm. She set the mug in front of him with a tea bag, already steeping, and sat back down and returned to her book. Jack stood there, looking at the mug, and something in his chest did something it had not done in a very long time. It softened. He sat down across from her. He wrapped his bruised hands around the mug. He drank the tea in silence while she read, and neither of them spoke. And it was the most peaceful 20 minutes Jack McCloud had experienced in recent memory. After that, it became a pattern. He would come home late. She would be there, not waiting for him, not performing availability, just there, reading, sometimes working on a crossword puzzle, sometimes listening to something through her earbuds with her eyes closed, her head tilted slightly, her lips moving with the words. She always made him tea. She never asked questions. And Jack, who had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, money, power, protection, access, found himself coming home earlier and earlier, not because he needed to be there, but because the apartment felt different when she was in it. It felt like something he did not have a word for. 3 weeks into the marriage, Angela's aunt called. Jack was in his office at the Alcott, the private members club on Newbury Street that served as the legitimate face of his operations, when his phone buzzed with a notification from the security system at the penthouse. Angela had a visitor, or rather, Angela had someone buzzing the intercom from the lobby with the kind of insistence that suggested they were not going away. He pulled up the camera feed on his laptop. A woman stood in the lobby. Mid-60s. Thin. Rigid posture. Expensive coat over a body held so tightly it looked like it might snap. Beside her stood a younger woman. Early 30s, blonde highlights. The calculated prettiness of someone who spent significant time and money on the project of being looked at. Jack recognized the type. He picked up his phone and called Angela. "Your aunt is here." Silence. "Angela, I see her on the intercom screen. Do you want me to come home?" Another silence, longer this time. "No, I can handle it." "Are you sure?" "I've been handling her my whole life, Jack. I can handle her in your lobby." He heard something in her voice he hadn't heard before. Not strength exactly. She had always been strong, but something sharper, something that sounded like the first syllable of enough. "Okay," he said, "but Angela?" "Yes. You don't have to let her in." There was a pause, and then, very quietly, she said, "I know." She let her in anyway. Jack stayed on the security feed. He was not proud of it. He understood that he was watching something private, something that Angela had the right to navigate alone. But the look on her aunt's face as she stepped into the elevator, that particular blend of curiosity and contempt, triggered something in Jack that went beyond protectiveness and into territory he was not ready to name. He watched. Miriam Kerr walked into the penthouse the way a real estate appraiser walks into a property, assessing, calculating, cataloging every surface for its market value. The younger woman, Tricia, Angela's cousin, followed behind, her eyes wide with the naked, unguarded envy of someone who had always assumed she would be the one in rooms like this. Angela stood by the kitchen island in jeans and a soft gray sweater, her arms crossed, her face carefully neutral. "Well," Miriam said, looking around, "this is quite the upgrade from Quincy." "Hello, Aunt Miriam." "Tricia." Miriam turned to face her. The look she gave Angela was the kind of look that leaves bruises no one can see. "I heard you married a man named McLeod." She said the name the way you'd say the name of a disease you're trying to identify. No one in the family was invited. It was a small ceremony. Small? Miriam's mouth thinned. "Angela, what have you gotten yourself into?" "I got married. To a man you barely know. A man who, from what I understand, is involved in—" She waved her hand vaguely, as if criminality were a smell she was trying to clear from the air. "Certain businesses." Angela said nothing. Tricia had wandered toward the living room windows. "This view is insane," she murmured, more to herself than anyone. Then she turned back, and the look she gave Angela was the specific, sharp-edged incredulity of a woman who cannot reconcile someone else's good fortune with her own expectations of how the world should work. "How did this even happen?" Tricia asked. "I mean, no offense, Ange, but how did someone like you end up with someone like—" She gestured at the penthouse, at the view, at the life. "Someone like you." Angela had heard those words in 100 different configurations her entire life. Someone like you doesn't get invited. Someone like you should be grateful. Someone like you shouldn't expect too much. "Nolan," Angela said simply. "He introduced us." Miriam's face shifted. The mention of Nolan, her nephew, the one she had also dismissed, the one who had died without a single visit from her, produced a flicker of something that might have been guilt in a different woman, but in Miriam was merely inconvenience. "Nolan," Miriam repeated. "Of course, even from the grave, that boy causes complications." Angela's hands tightened against her own arms. She felt the old, familiar heat behind her eyes, the one she had spent decades learning to extinguish before it showed. "Is there something you need, Aunt Miriam?" Miriam straightened, adjusted her coat, looked at Angela the way she had always looked at her, as an unfinished equation that would never balance. "I need to know that you're not going to embarrass this family." "This family," Angela said, and her voice was very calm, "didn't come to Nolan's funeral. Not you, not Tricia, not Uncle David. I sat alone in a pew while you whispered about me from the front row, so I'm not sure which family you're worried about protecting." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the furniture of a room. Miriam's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "How dare you?" "I dare," Angela said. "Because I'm standing in my own home and you walked in without being invited, and I've been listening to you tell me what I am and what I'm not since I was 12 years old, and I am finished." Jack, watching from his office, leaned back in his chair. Something unfamiliar crossed his face. It was not surprise. He had already suspected she had this in her. It was something quieter and more dangerous. The recognition of a woman who had been fighting alone for a very long time, and who had just, for the first time, fought in a space where she was allowed to win. Miriam gathered herself. She tugged the collar of her coat. She looked at Angela with the offended dignity of a woman who has been confronted with her own cruelty and chosen to interpret it as disrespect. "We'll see how long this lasts," she said. "Men like that don't stay with women like you, not once the novelty wears off." She turned and walked toward the elevator. Tricia followed, casting one last envious glance at the harbor view before the doors closed. Angela stood in the kitchen for a long time after they left. Her hands were shaking, her jaw was tight. She was breathing through her nose in the slow, deliberate way of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. Jack's phone buzzed. He looked down. A text from Vera. Your wife handled that well. Jack typed back, I know. He put the phone down and stared at the frozen frame of the security fight. Angela, alone in the kitchen, one hand braced against the counter, her head slightly bowed. And Jack McLeod, a man who had destroyed competitors and dismantled rival organizations and sat across from federal prosecutors without blinking, felt something in his chest that he could not destroy or dismantle or stare down. He felt the beginning of something that had no business existing in a man like him. He came home early that night. Angela was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching something on television that she clearly was not seeing. The volume was low. The lights were off except for the glow of the screen. Jack set his keys on the counter, took off his jacket, rolled his sleeves. He went to the kitchen and began pulling things from the refrigerator. Chicken, vegetables, rice, olive oil. He moved with the quiet competence of a man who had learned to cook in a childhood where no one was going to do it for him. Angela turned her head. You cook? Don't sound so surprised. Oh, she watched him from the couch. The sound of the knife against the cutting board was steady and rhythmic, and she found it soothing in a way she did not expect. The sound of someone making something in a space that was also hers. I saw the security footage, Jack said, not looking up from the cutting board. From today. Angela went very still. I'm sorry, she said. I should have... Don't apologize. He looked at her. His gray eyes were steady. You stood your ground. That's nothing to apologize for. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She's always been like that, Angela said quietly. Since I was a kid. My mother died when I was 9. My father couldn't handle it. He just kind of, disappeared. Aunt Miriam took me in, but she never let me forget it was charity. I was the extra plate at the table, the cousin who didn't quite fit, though. Jack said nothing. He kept chopping. The knife moved in precise, even strokes. Nolan was the only one who treated me like family, she continued. Really treated me like family. He used to call me every Sunday, no matter what. Even when he was sick, even at the end. Her voice wavered. She steadied it. He called me the day before he died and told me he had taken care of everything. I didn't know what he meant. Now you do. She looked at him. He loved you, she said. He told me that, not in those words because Nolan would never say something that directly, but he said, Jack McLeod is the only person I trust completely. That's what love sounds like when men like Nolan say it. Jack's hands stopped, moving, just for a moment. Then they resumed. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, he said. They ate at the kitchen island. This time Angela did not eat carefully. She ate the way you eat when someone has cooked for you with their own hands, and the food is warm, and the apartment is quiet, and you are beginning to understand that you are not a guest in this house. You are something else. Something neither of you has figured out yet. Weeks passed. The marriage settled into its own rhythm, not the rigid formality Angela had expected, and not the distant arrangement Jack had planned. It became something else, something neither of them had anticipated. Jack began leaving the office earlier, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else would notice, but his second in command, a man named Declan Rourke, noticed. Declan had known Jack for 15 years and had never seen him leave before 8 o'clock, unless someone was bleeding or a deal was falling apart. Now Jack was leaving at 7, then 6:30, then 6. You're going home, Declan observed one evening, watching Jack pull on his coat. I live there. You've lived there for 4 years. You've never gone home at 6. Jack buttoned his coat. Your point. Declan leaned back in his chair and smiled the way only a man who has survived a decade and a half in the service of a dangerous person can smile, with equal parts affection and terror. No point, boss. Just an observation. Jack left without responding. Declan watched him go and shook his head slowly. Well, he muttered to the empty room. That's new. At home, things were changing. Angela had stopped moving along the edges. She still kept her space clean. She still made the bed with hospital corners. But she had started leaving small traces of herself in the shared spaces, a book on the coffee table, a mug in the dish rack, a sweater draped over the arm of the couch. Tiny territorial claims that Jack noticed and did not comment on, and privately, irrationally, treasured. She had started cooking too. Not every night, but often enough that Jack would come home to the smell of garlic and onions and whatever she had decided to experiment with that evening. She cooked the way she did everything, methodically, with attention, and with a quiet creativity that surprised him. One Thursday night, he came home to the smell of something rich and layered, a stew of some kind. Wine and rosemary and slow-cooked meat. Angela was in the kitchen, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a recipe pulled up on her phone, her sleeves pushed up to her elbows. She looked up when he walked in and smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at him like that, unguarded, unrehearsed, the smile of a woman who was genuinely happy to see another person. Not performing it, not bracing for the response, just happy. Jack felt it in his sternum, a physical thing like a lock turning. "That smells incredible," he said. "It might be terrible. I've never made it before." "Then we'll find out together." She laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised, as if the sound of her own laughter startled her. They ate at the island again, but this time the silence between them was different. It was warm. It had texture. It was the silence of two people who are beginning to learn each other's rhythms and are finding, to their mutual surprise, that the rhythms fit. After dinner, Jack poured 2 glasses of whiskey and carried them to the living room. He handed one to Angela, who accepted it with raised eyebrows. "I'm not really a whiskey person," she said. "Try it." She sipped, made a face, then sipped again. "It's growing on me," she admitted. Jack sat in the armchair. Angela sat on the couch. The city glowed through the windows behind them. "Tell me something," Jack said. "About what?" "About you, something I don't know." Angela considered this. She turned the glass slowly in her hands. "I wanted to be a teacher," she said. "When I was young, I wanted to teach English literature. I had this whole plan: college, graduate school, a small apartment near a university, bookshelves everywhere. I used to imagine it so clearly I could smell the books. What happened? Money happened, or the lack of it. My aunt told me I needed to get a job that paid, not a job that mattered, so I got a job at the front desk of a hotel and told myself it was temporary." She smiled, sad and small. "That was 10 years ago." Jack studied her. "It's not too late. To teach, to do whatever you want." Angela looked at him with an expression he was becoming addicted to. That mix of disbelief and hope that crossed her face whenever someone suggested that her life could be bigger than the box she had been put in. "Maybe," she said, and then quieter. "Tell me something about you." Jack swirled the whiskey in his glass. "I started reading because of prison," he said. Angela's eyebrows rose. She didn't recoil, didn't flinch. She just looked at him and waited. "I was 20, 18 months for assault. The prison library was the only place nobody bothered you. I read everything. Hemingway, McCarthy, Dostoevsky, James Baldwin." He paused. "Baldwin was the one who changed something. He wrote about being visible in a world that wanted you invisible. I understood that." Angela was very still. "I understand it too," she said. They looked at each other across the living room, and the space between them felt like it had changed shape. Smaller now, more intentional, as if the room itself had decided these two people should be closer. Jack finished his whiskey, set the glass down. "Good night, Angela." "Good night, Jack." She watched him walk down the hallway toward his room, and she sat on the couch for a long time after his door closed, holding the whiskey glass against her chest, thinking about a man who had read James Baldwin in a prison library and who had kissed her forehead on their wedding day, and who looked at her as if she were something worth seeing. The incident at the hotel happened on a rainy Wednesday in November. Angela was working the afternoon shift at the Harbor Regency, the kind of gray, wet day that made the lobby feel smaller and made the guests feel larger. She was behind the front desk, processing a check-in for a couple from Connecticut when she heard the voice. "Oh my God, Angela?" She looked up. Trisha was crossing the lobby with two friends in tow. Polished, expensive women with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. They were carrying shopping bags from Newbury Street. They had clearly come in for drinks at the hotel bar, the way women like that drifted into nice hotels for drinks, like it was their living room. Angela's stomach clenched. "I didn't know you still worked here," Trisha said, approaching the desk with the wide, performative smile of a woman who is about to say something cruel and wants witnesses. "I thought now that you're married to Mr. Big Shot, you'd at least have quit the day job." Angela kept her face neutral. "Hello, Trisha. Girls, this is my cousin Angela." Trisha turned to her friends with the theatrical flair of someone introducing a punchline. She recently married a very wealthy man. Which is hilarious because she stopped herself, laughed, covered her mouth as if the joke were too delicious to contain. "Sorry, I'm sorry. That's mean. I shouldn't." One of the friends smiled. The other had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Can I help you with something?" Angela asked, her voice steady, professional. The voice of a woman who had been surviving moments like this since before she could drive. "Actually, yes." Trisha leaned on the counter. "I'm just curious. How does it work exactly? The whole marriage thing, does he, look at you during, She raised her eyebrows suggestively. "Or does he just close his eyes and think of someone prettier?" The friend who had been uncomfortable looked away. The other one laughed. Angela felt the heat climb the back of her neck. She felt the old, familiar tightness in her throat, the precursor to tears she had sworn off years ago. She felt the full weight of being humiliated in her own workplace, in her own lobby, by a woman who shared her blood and had never once shared her kindness. She opened her mouth to respond, to deflect, to redirect, to do what she always did, which was absorb the blow and keep moving, when a voice cut across the lobby like a blade through silk. "Trisha Kerr." Every head in the lobby turned. Jack McLeod stood near the entrance, rain darkening the shoulders of his black overcoat, his hair slightly damp, his gray eyes fixed on Trisha with the kind of absolute, unblinking focus that predators use right before they move. He had come to pick Angela up. He had started doing that lately, showing up at the end of her shift, waiting in the lobby, driving her home. He told himself it was practical. He told Declan it was about security. He told no one the truth, which was that the 30-minute drive home with Angela in the passenger seat, talking about her day, or listening to the radio, or sitting in companionable silence, had become the part of his day he looked forward to most. He had walked in just in time to hear everything. Trisha's face went white. Not the white of embarrassment, the white of a woman who has just realized she has made a sound in the forest and something large has heard her. Trisha straightened up, tried to recover. "Jack, hi, I heard what you were just." He walked toward the desk, slowly, the way he always moved, with the unhurried precision of someone who has never needed to rush because the world has learned to wait for him. He stopped beside Angela, not in front of her, beside her, close enough that his arm nearly touched hers, close enough that everyone in the lobby could see exactly where he stood and exactly what it meant. "Let me be very clear about something," Jack said, and his voice was quiet, conversational. The kind of quiet that is more frightening than any shout, because it means the man speaking has moved past anger and into the territory beyond it. "You will not speak to my wife that way. Not here. Not anywhere. Not ever again." Trisha's lips moved. No sound came out. "And since we're having this conversation," Jack continued, "let me address something else. I did not marry Angela because I had to. I did not marry her because of Nolan, or because of obligation, or because of a promise made in a hospital room." He paused. "I married her because she is the most remarkable person I have ever met. And the fact that you and your mother have spent 32 years too blind to see that is not her failure. It's yours." The lobby was silent. The couple from Connecticut stood frozen, mid-check-in. The concierge had stopped typing. Even the jazz playing softly through the speakers seemed to have pulled back, as if the music itself was listening. Trisha's friend, the one who had laughed, was not laughing now. Jack turned to Angela. His face changed. The cold authority dissolved. What replaced it was something Angela had only seen in glimpses, in the forehead kiss, in the late-night silences, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. "Ready to go?" he asked. Angela looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Her chin was steady. "Yes," she said. Jack offered her his arm. She took it. They walked out of the lobby together, through the revolving doors, into the rain, and Angela did not look back at Trisha, and Trisha did not follow. And the silence in the lobby lasted a very long time. In the car, Angela did not speak for 6 blocks. Jack drove. The rain streaked the windshield. The city blurred around them like a watercolor painting of a world that suddenly looked different than it had an hour ago. On the 7th block, Angela said, "You didn't have to do that." Jack kept his eyes on the road. "Yes, I did. She's my cousin. She's always been like that. I've learned to. You've learned to take it, I know. That's the problem." Angela pressed her lips together. She looked out the window. Her reflection stared back at her. A woman who had spent her life being small, sitting next to a man who had just told a room full of strangers that she was remarkable, and she did not know what to do with the feeling that was filling her chest like light. "Jack." "Yeah. What you said in there, about not marrying me out of obligation." She turned to face him. "Did you mean it?" Jack pulled the car to the curb. He put it in park. He turned off the engine. The rain drummed on the roof. He turned to look at her, fully, completely, with the kind of attention he usually reserved for negotiations where the wrong word could end a life. "I made a promise to Nolan," he said, "and I would have kept that promise no matter what. I would have married you and protected you and made sure you were taken care of for the rest of your life." Angela waited. "But somewhere between the tea at midnight and the stew on Thursday night, and the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're reading," he said, "the promise stopped being the reason." Angela's breath caught. "You became the reason." The rain fell. The car was warm. The city moved around them, millions of people rushing through their own lives, oblivious to the fact that in a black sedan, on a side street in Boston, a woman who had spent 32 years believing she was invisible was being seen, truly, completely, devastatingly seen, by a man who had once believed he was incapable of this exact thing. Angela reached across the center console and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, tight, immediate, as if he had been waiting for this, without knowing he was waiting. "I'm not going to let you go," he said quietly. "I know that wasn't the deal. I know you were supposed to be able to leave after a year. But I need you to know that I'm not letting you go." "Jack." "Never said that to anyone. I've never wanted to say it, but you came into my house and you made it a home, and I didn't even realize it was empty until you filled it." Angela's eyes were shining. She did not wipe them. She let the tears sit there, openly, honestly, because she was done hiding the things she felt from the man sitting beside her. "I wasn't planning on leaving," she whispered. Jack's hand tightened around hers. "Say that again." "I'm not leaving, Jack." He lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips against her knuckles. Not a kiss, exactly, but something deeper than a kiss. A seal. A signature on a contract that no lawyer had drafted, and no court could enforce, and no power on earth could break. The confrontation with Miriam came 3 weeks later. Angela had gone back to school. Jack had made one phone call to the admissions office at Boston University, not to pull strings, because Angela would have refused anything she hadn't earned, but to ensure that the financial barrier was removed. Tuition, books, fees, all handled. When Angela protested, Jack said simply, "You said you wanted to teach, so teach." She enrolled in the spring semester, English literature. The first class was on a Monday morning, and she walked into the lecture hall carrying a new backpack and a second-hand copy of Beloved by Toni Morrison. And she sat in the front row, and she did not apologize for being there. Miriam found out through Trisha. Trisha found out through Instagram, where one of Angela's co-workers at the hotel had posted a congratulatory message. The speed with which this information traveled through the Kerr family network could only be explained by the specific physics of envy, which moves faster than light and produces more heat. Miriam called Angela on a Tuesday evening. Angela was studying at the kitchen island, her notes spread out around her like a paper garden, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She looked at the caller ID. She looked at Jack, who was sitting across from her, reading a contract. He looked up, read her face, read the phone. "You don't have to answer it," he said. "I know." She picked up the phone. "Hello, Aunt Miriam." The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Jack listened to Angela's half of it. The careful responses, the measured tone, the way she said, "I understand, and I hear you, and that's your opinion," in the calm, level voice of a woman who is not fighting back, but is also not retreating. Then Miriam said something that changed the temperature. Angela's face went flat. The color left her cheeks. Her hand tightened around the phone. "What did she say?" Jack asked after Angela hung up. Angela set the phone down on the counter very carefully, the way you set down something breakable. She said Nolan would be ashamed of me for taking advantage of his friend, for using his death to trap a rich man into marriage. Angela's voice was steady, but her hands were not. She said I should remember what I am and stop pretending to be something I'm not. Jack sat very still. The stillness was the warning. The absolute, total absence of movement that preceded the most dangerous version of Jack McLeod. The version that had built an empire, the version that had ended partnerships and rivalries, and in certain dark corners of the past, ended other things too. She said that. Yes. About Nolan. Yes. Jack stood. He picked up his phone. He walked to the window and made a call. Angela heard fragments, quiet fragments, because Jack never raised his voice. That was one of the things she had learned about him, that the quieter he became, the more seriously you should take whatever he said next. She heard Miriam Kerr. She heard her husband's construction company. She heard every contract they have with the city. She heard by Friday. When he hung up, he turned back to her. "What did you do?" Angela asked. "Miriam's husband David has a construction company. Mid-size. He bids on city contracts. Schools, municipal buildings, road work. Those contracts have kept them comfortable for 20 years. Jack paused. "As of Friday, those contracts will be under review. The review will find irregularities. There will be an audit. The audit will find more irregularities. David's company will lose its preferred contractor status with the city of Boston." Angela stared at him. "You can do that?" "Angela." He said her name the way you say something sacred. "I can do whatever I want. The question has always been whether I should. And when someone uses Nolan's name to hurt you, to use his memory as a weapon against the one person who actually loved him, the answer becomes very simple." Angela stood from the island. She walked toward him. She stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to look at him, and she was trembling, but not from fear. "Yeah, I don't need you to fight my battles," she said. "I know. I've been fighting them alone my whole life." "I know that too." "Then why?" Jack reached out. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so familiar, so intimate, so achingly tender, that Angela felt her composure crack like ice on a spring river. "Because you're not alone anymore," he said. "And because the people who hurt you need to understand that the cost of doing so has changed." Angela stood there in the blue light of the harbor, looking up at a man who frightened senators and silenced courtrooms, and who was touching her hair with the gentleness of someone handling something irreplaceable. She rose on her toes. She kissed him. It was not a long kiss. It was not dramatic or cinematic or the kind of kiss that makes music swell in a movie theater. It was brief and fierce and honest. The kiss of a woman who had decided to stop being afraid of wanting things, pressed against the mouth of a man who had decided to stop pretending he didn't want them. When she pulled back, Jack's eyes were different. The gray had gone dark. His hand had moved from her hair to the back of her neck, and he was holding her there, not trapping her, not pulling her closer, just holding, as if he needed to feel her pulse under his palm to believe she was real. Again, he said. She kissed him again. This time it was longer. The audits happened. David Kerr's construction company lost 3 major contracts in the span of 2 months. Miriam called Angela exactly once more. The conversation was brief. "Call off your husband," Miriam said. "I didn't ask him to do anything," Angela replied. "And even if I had, he's not a dog, Aunt Miriam. He's my husband. He makes his own decisions." "This is blackmail." "No, this is consequence. You spent 30 years treating me and Nolan like stains on the family name, and now you're discovering that one of those stains married a man who doesn't tolerate that kind of thing." Angela paused. "I'm sorry about David's company. I genuinely am. But you used Nolan's name to hurt me. You used the memory of a dead man, your own nephew, as a weapon. And that was the last time." Miriam was silent. "Goodbye, Aunt Miriam." Angela hung up the phone. She set it on the counter. She exhaled. Jack was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his shoulder against the frame, his arms crossed. He had been listening. He always listened. "How do you feel?" he asked. Angela looked at him, and she smiled. Not the sad smile, not the careful smile, not the smile she had spent decades wearing like a mask. A real smile, wide and warm and reckless and alive. "Free," she said. Spring came. Angela thrived at BU. She sat in classrooms full of students 10 years younger than her, and she did not feel old. She felt hungry. She devoured Toni Morrison and Ralph Ellison and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Sandra Cisneros. She wrote papers that her professors returned with exclamation points in the margins. She stayed after class to talk about narrative structure and the politics of visibility and the way that literature can be a mirror and a window at the same time. She came home full, buzzing, carrying books and ideas and the particular energy of a person who has found the thing they were always meant to do. Jack watched it happen. He watched the way she walked now, differently. Not along the edges. Through the center of the room, he watched the way she spoke, more firmly, with more volume, as if she had finally decided that her voice deserved the space it occupied. He watched her read in bed, because she had started sleeping in his bed, because one night she had fallen asleep on the couch and he had carried her to his room, and she had woken up against his chest, and neither of them had said a word about it, and it had simply become the way things were. He watched her argue with him about books. She told him he was wrong about Hemingway. Too spare, she said, too afraid of emotion. He told her she was wrong about McCarthy. Not nihilistic, he said, just honest about the dark. They argued for an hour. They did not resolve it. It was the best hour of Jack's week. He watched her interact with his world, cautiously at first. Then, with increasing ease, she met Declan at a dinner and made him laugh so hard he choked on his wine. She met Vera for coffee, and the 2 women became allies in the specific, quiet way that 2 formidable women recognize each other and decide to be friends. She met the other wives, the women who existed in the orbit of Jack's organization. Some were warm, some were cold. One, a woman named Celia, married to one of Jack's captains, pulled Angela aside at a gathering and said, "He looks at you like you invented gravity. I've known him 10 years, and I've never seen that face." Angela didn't know what to say to that, but she held it, she kept it, she pressed it into her chest, the way she pressed flowers between the pages of books she loved. The night everything changed for good was in late April. There was a gala, a charity event at the Four Seasons. The kind of evening where powerful men wore tuxedos and powerful women wore gowns, and everyone pretended that the checks they were writing were about altruism rather than visibility. Jack attended because he was expected to. Angela attended because Jack asked her to. She wore a dark green dress, not borrowed, not secondhand, one that Jack had arranged to be made for her. She had protested when the seamstress came to the penthouse. Jack had said, "You're walking into a room full of people who judge everything by appearance. I want them to see you the way I see you." The dress was simple, elegant. It fit her body, her real body, the one she had spent years apologizing for, as if it had been designed by someone who understood that beauty is not a size but a presence. When Angela walked out of the bedroom, Jack was in the living room, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up, he stopped. His hands, which had been moving with their usual precision, went completely still. His eyes moved over her, not appraising, not evaluating, but absorbing, taking her in the way you take in a painting that has been there your whole life, but that you are seeing for the first time in the right light. You look. He stopped. Jack McLeod, who always had the right word, who could negotiate ceasefires and construct sentences that cut like surgical instruments, did not have the right word. I look what? Angela asked, smiling. Like the reason I come home. She blinked. The smile wobbled, then steadied. That's a good line, McLeod. It's not a line. They went to the gala. The room was enormous, as to crystal chandeliers. A live orchestra. Hundreds of people moving through the space with the choreographed ease of a world that runs on money and the careful performance of belonging. Angela walked in on Jack's arm, and she felt every eye in the room perform the same calculation, the quick, involuntary assessment that happens when a powerful man appears with a woman who does not match the template. She felt the looks. She had been feeling them her whole life, but this time she did not shrink. She stood straight. She kept her hand on Jack's arm. She looked back at the faces that were trying to figure out the equation, and she let them look, because she was done being a mystery that needed solving. She was a fact. She was here. She was his. Jack introduced her to mayors and hedge fund managers, and a senator who owed him a favor he would never publicly acknowledge. Angela shook hands. She made conversation. She was warm and intelligent and funny in the quiet, unexpected way that catches people off guard and makes them lean in. The senator's wife, a thin woman with perfect posture and a 3-carat ring, asked Angela what she did. I'm studying English literature at BU, Angela said. Oh, how lovely. And before that? I worked the front desk at the Harbor Regency. The senator's wife blinked, recalibrated, smiled in the tight, automatic way of someone who has just encountered something they don't know how to categorize. How refreshing, she said. Angela smiled back. Isn't it? Jack, standing beside her, took a sip of his drink to hide the expression on his face. Later, on the dance floor, he held her. They moved slowly, offbeat, out of sync with the orchestra in a way that should have been awkward, but instead felt intentional. As if they had decided together, without words, that the rhythm they were following was their own. You're doing that thing again, Angela murmured. What thing? Looking at me like I'm the only person in the room. You are the only person in the room. Everyone else is furniture. She laughed, leaned her forehead against his chest. Felt his arms tighten around her, not possessive, not controlling, but protective, the embrace of a man who had found something he hadn't known he was looking for and was quietly, fiercely determined never to lose it. Jack, I think I love you. She said it into his chest, quietly, almost hoping the music would swallow it. His arms tightened. I know you do, he said. She looked up at him. That's arrogant. It's observational. And do you? She left the question unfinished, hanging, the way all the most important questions in life hang, in the space between wanting to know and being terrified of the answer. Jack stopped dancing, in the middle of the floor, with 200 people around them, with the orchestra playing, with the chandeliers pouring light down on them like rain. He lifted her chin with one finger. Angela Kerr. McLeod, he said, and his voice was low, and it was steady, and it was the truest thing he had ever said. I have run an empire. I have survived things that would break most people. I have sat across from men who wanted me dead, and I did not flinch. He paused. But when you smile at me, I forget how to breathe. And that is not something I was prepared for. Angela's eyes filled. Is that a yes? She whispered. That's a yes. That's an always. That's every single morning I wake up next to you and can't believe you're real. She kissed him, on the dance floor, in front of 200 people, in front of the senator and his wife, and the hedge fund managers, and the mayor, and the waiters, and the musicians, and every single person who had looked at her when she walked in and wondered what a man like Jack McLeod was doing with a woman like her. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and the answer to their question was written in the space between their mouths, and it was this: was not doing anything with her. He was choosing her, fully, freely, and without a single reservation, and she was choosing him back. The year passed. The deadline came and went without acknowledgement. No conversation, no renegotiation, no discussion of terms or exit strategies or the practical dissolution of a temporary arrangement. On the day that marked exactly 12 months since the ceremony in the judge's chambers, Jack came home with a small box. Not a ring box. She already had a ring, the simple platinum band he had placed on her finger during the ceremony, chosen quickly, without sentiment, as a formality. This box was smaller. She opened it. Inside was a necklace, a thin gold chain with a single pendant, a small, round locket. Boy, inside the locket were two things: a photograph of Nolan, young and grinning, taken years before the diagnosis, and a tiny, folded piece of paper. Angela unfolded the paper. In Jack's handwriting, sharp and precise and certain, were 4 words: "You were never invisible." Angela held the locket in her palm and looked at the man standing in front of her, and she understood, finally and completely, the full shape of what had happened to her. A dying man had loved her enough to ask the impossible. A powerful man had kept his promise, and somewhere in the keeping of it, the promise had transformed into something that neither obligation nor duty could explain. Something that lived in late-night tea and Thursday stews and forehead kisses, and the quiet, devastating tenderness of a man who had looked at a woman the world had overlooked and had seen her. All of her. Every single part. "Thank you," she said. But she was not thanking him for the necklace. She was thanking him for staying, for seeing, for choosing her when he didn't have to, for turning a promise made in a hospital room into a love that neither of them had expected and neither of them could live without. Jack pulled her close. His arms went around her. His chin rested on the top of her head. And they stood there in the penthouse, in the city, in the life they had built together from obligation and observation and protection and devotion, and Angela pressed her ear against his chest and listened to his heartbeat and thought, "I was never invisible. I just hadn't met the right pair of eyes." And Jack held her, and he thought about a warehouse on the waterfront, and a man with a crowbar and a bullet in a shoulder, and a promise made in a hospital room that had changed the course of his life in ways he could not have imagined. "Thank you, Nolan," he thought. And somewhere, in whatever quiet place the dead go to rest, Nolan Kerr smiled. Because he had always known. He had always known that the two people he loved most in the world would find each other if he could just give them the reason to try. And they had. And they would keep finding each other, every day, in every room, in every silence, in every small gesture of kindness and courage and devotion that makes a marriage real, not because they had to, because they chose to. And that, in the